They always thought you'd be there, not waiting at the door, not frozen in place, but available, emotionally open, still orbiting the connection. They assumed Tom was on their side, that they could leave, pull away, go quiet, explore distance, and you would still exist in the background of their life. Not gone, just paused. They never imagined the day would come when you stopped waiting. And that moment, that exact moment, is when everything changes for them. Avoidants don't fear endings, they fear permanence. They're comfortable with distance, as long as it's reversible, as long as the door is quietly unlocked. They leave with the unspoken belief that you'll still be reachable, still emotionally available, still holding space, not because they're cruel, but because that's how their nervous system stays regulated. They need to know the connection still exists, even if they're not inside it. That's why they disappear, without closure, why they don't explain, why they keep things vague. Ambiguity is safety. It allows them to exit without confronting loss, without confronting impact, without confronting you, moving on without them. They don't say goodbye. They say later, even when they don't use the word. For a long time, they feel calm, relieved, unburdened, back in control. They tell themselves, "You're fine. You'll adjust. You'll understand." They imagine you, still thinking of them, still hoping, still emotionally tethered. And that fantasy keeps them grounded, because as long as you're waiting, they haven't really lost anything. Distance only works when there's something to return to, but then something shifts. It's subtle at first, almost unnoticeable. They reach for the idea of you, and it doesn't respond. The same way, your energy feels different, quieter, unavailable, not angry, not dramatic, just gone. And that's when their body reacts, before their mind does. This is the moment they never prepare for. Not when you cry, not when you ask for answers, not even when you walk away. The moment that shakes them is when you stop waiting, without announcing it. No goodbye speech, no final message, no explanation, just absence that feels final. That's when the panic sets in. Avoidants don't feel loss when the relationship ends. They feel loss when access ends, when they realize you're no longer emotionally available on their timeline, when they sense you're not holding space anymore, because space was the one thing they assumed they controlled. They replay the past, looking for signs. When did you stop responding the same? When did your warmth shift? When did your presence soften into indifference? They tell themselves, "You're just busy, just distracted, just going through something." But deep down, their body knows this isn't distraction. This is detachment. And detachment from you feels very different than detachment from others. Because you weren't just someone they dated. You were the emotional anchor they never admitted they needed. The place they could leave and still feel connected to. You grounded them without demanding they stay. That's rare. And when that grounding disappears, their system destabilizes. They start checking in ways they pretend not to. Not always through messages, sometimes through memories, sometimes through social media, sometimes through mutual spaces. They look for evidence that you're still there, still open, still waiting. But instead, they see movement, growth, distance, a life continuing, without reference to them. And that's when the realization hits. Sharp and unexpected. You didn't just stop waiting. You moved on internally. And that's something they can't undo. Avoidants are used to people reacting emotionally, chasing, questioning, explaining, trying to reconnect. They know how to manage that. What they don't know how to manage is quiet finality, peace without them. When you stop reacting, they lose orientation because your reactions were proof that the bond still existed. Your silence now is proof that it doesn't. This is where confusion begins. They feel pulled toward you for the first time since leaving, not because they suddenly feel ready, but because the power dynamic shifted. You are no longer emotionally paused. You are no longer holding the door. And that loss of access creates urgency they've never felt before. They don't call it longing. They call it curiosity. They don't call it regret. They call it confusion. They don't call it fear. They call it missing something. Avoidants intellectualize emotions to survive them, but their body knows exactly what's happening. They are facing irreversibility, the thing they fear most. Not abandonment, but finality, because finality means they don't get to decide when closeness resumes. And that loss of control is destabilizing. They start imagining scenarios. What if you meet someone else? What if you don't care anymore? What if you're happier without them? These thoughts don't come from ego. They come from attachment, from the realization that the safe emotional distance they relied on no longer exists. They may still not reach out. Not yet. Avoidants don't act immediately. When they feel something, they freeze, analyze, delay. But internally, the shift is already happening because this is the first time they feel something closing without their consent. You didn't leave dramatically. You didn't demand accountability. You didn't force a conversation. You simply reclaimed yourself. And that quiet decision echoes louder in them than any argument ever did. They start questioning the story they told themselves, that you'd always be there. That time was flexible, that they could come back when they were ready. Readiness no longer matters when the door is closed. And here's the part you don't see. They don't immediately miss you. They miss what you represented: emotional safety, unconditional presence, a place to return to. When that disappears, the nervous system panics. They realize they miscalculated. They thought distance meant control. They didn't realize distance only works when someone stays available. On the other side, you didn't punish them. You didn't disappear to provoke. You simply stopped waiting for someone who wasn't choosing you. And that's the moment they feel the weight of their own pattern. Because now, if they come back, it won't be to someone who is holding space. It will be to someone who has moved on emotionally. And that changes everything. This is the moment the avoidant realizes they didn't just take space, they lost access. And access was the one thing they assumed they'd always have. At first, they try to normalize it. They tell themselves, this is fine, that people move on, that you're allowed to live your life. They repeat it until it almost sounds true. But something doesn't settle, because this isn't just you moving forward. This feels like the emotional cord has been cut, and for the first time, they feel what you felt when they pulled away: disorientation, uncertainty, loss of grounding. Avoidants rarely experience this reversal. They're used to being the ones who detach first. So when the detachment comes from the other side, their system doesn't know how to regulate it. They start scanning the past for leverage, moments where they think they still matter, times when you reached out, when you softened, when you stayed. They replay those scenes, not out of nostalgia, but out of fear that those moments are gone forever. Because this time, your absence doesn't feel like protest. It feels like completion. Avoidants rely on unfinished endings, open loops, loose threads, emotional ambiguity. It allows them to leave without fully losing. But when you stop waiting, the loop closes. And closure is not comforting to them. Closure means they don't get to return on their terms. They begin to notice how much of their calm was built on the assumption that you were still there, still thinking, still hoping, still available. That assumption was regulating them, and now it's gone. Their days feel slightly off. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious, just a subtle restlessness. They can't explain. They feel more irritable, more distant, more disconnected from people around them because the emotional anchor they unconsciously leaned on has released. This is when the comparisons begin, not between you and the new person, but between how they feel now and how grounded they felt before. They realize they haven't felt truly settled since you stopped waiting. Not excited, not peaceful, not at ease, just suspended. Avoidants don't process loss through sadness first. They process it through destabilization. Their routines lose rhythm. Their confidence wavers. Their sense of control thins. They don't immediately think of you. They feel the absence of regulation. And only later do they connect the dots. They catch themselves wondering if you're okay, not out of care, but out of self-soothing, because knowing you were okay used to calm them. And now they don't know. They may try to test the waters. A story view, a subtle like, a casual reaction, nothing direct, nothing vulnerable, just enough to see if the door is still open. But when you don't respond, or respond differently, the message lands. This isn't the same. And that realization hits deeper than rejection, because rejection implies choice. This feels like finality. Avoidants struggle most with things they can't undo. Missed chances, unspoken truths, doors closed quietly, because those require self-reflection, and self-reflection has always been dangerous terrain for them. They start asking questions they avoided before. Why did I need so much distance? Why did closeness feel suffocating? Why did I assume they'd always be there? These questions don't come from emotional maturity. They come from loss of control, because control was never about you. It was about knowing they could leave without consequences. And now, consequences are real. They feel something unfamiliar, not longing, not regret, responsibility. Responsibility for the pattern, for the silence, for the delays, for the half-presence, for assuming love could be paused without cost. This is when avoidance meets reality, not in confrontation, not in conversation, but in the absence they can't negotiate with. They realize you didn't leave to make a point. You left because staying no longer felt aligned. And that understanding cuts deeper than anger ever could. They may still not reach out, not because they don't want to, but because reaching out now requires accountability. It requires acknowledging that you moved on because of their pattern, and that acknowledgement threatens the identity they've built around independence. So instead, they sit with the discomfort, and avoidance is not good at sitting. They distract again. They stay busy. They fill time. They lean into work, people, noise. But this time, the distraction doesn't regulate, because the emotional safety they relied on was never external activity. It was you. They begin to understand something unsettling. You weren't waiting because you lacked options. You were waiting because you were invested. And when that investment ended, it wasn't because you gave up. It was because you grew. That realization creates a strange mix inside them. Admiration, loss, shame, respect. They feel proud of you and devastated by that pride, because growth means you won't return to the version of yourself they left behind. And if they reach out now, they risk being seen clearly, not idealized, not chased, not accommodated, but evaluated. Avoidance fear evaluation, because evaluation means being known, and being known means being vulnerable. They remember how patient you were, how steady, how understanding, not with bitterness, but with clarity. They see now how much space you gave and how little they used it to actually show up. This is the stage where some avoidants return. Not all. Some will feel the discomfort and retreat deeper into patterns. Others will feel it and finally question themselves. But either way, the shift has happened. You are no longer emotionally accessible, and that changes how they hold your memory. You're no longer a safe fallback. You're a missed opportunity. They realize they didn't lose you when they left. They lost you when you stopped waiting. And that loss doesn't come with chaos. It comes with clarity, a quiet, inescapable clarity. They carry forward. At this stage, something inside them shifts. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough that the old story no longer works. The story where they were fine. The story where distance meant freedom. The story where you were just there, in the background of their life. That story collapses quietly. They start noticing how often you cross their mind, not as longing, not as obsession, but as reference, a comparison point their body keeps returning to. Without asking permission, they measure new interactions against how it felt to be with you, not romantically, nervously. Did I feel this calm before? Did I feel this understood? Did I feel grounded like this? And the answer keeps coming back incomplete. Avoidants don't miss chaos. They miss regulation. They miss the way their nervous system settled in your presence without effort. They didn't realize how rare that was until it disappeared. They begin to feel exposed in a new way, not emotionally naked, emotionally unsupported. They notice how much of their stability was quietly co-regulated by you. Your steadiness, your consistency, your emotional fluency. You anchored them without trapping them. And now, without that anchor, they feel unmoored. This is where the urge to reach out begins. Not strong enough to act on, but strong enough to be noticed. They imagine casual openings, a light message, a neutral check-in, something that doesn't reveal how much the shift affected them, because revealing impact feels like losing the last bit of emotional armor they have. Avoidants don't fear rejection here. They fear confirmation. Confirmation that you truly moved on, that they are no longer the emotional reference point, that they misjudged how long they had. So they hesitate. They wait. They watch. They notice your absence isn't performative. You're not trying to be seen. You're not signaling strength. You're not posting for attention. You're just living. And that unsettles them. Because if you were angry, they could justify the distance. If you were sad, they could reassure themselves they still mattered. If you were reactive, they could stay in control. But calm movement forward offers no leverage. They realize you didn't detach emotionally to get a response. You detached because something inside you resolved. That resolution is what they feel now. Not loss, not heartbreak, finality. Avoidants don't struggle with being left. They struggle with being completed without them. They begin to understand something uncomfortable. You weren't waiting because you lacked self-worth. You were waiting because you believed they would eventually meet you where you stood. And when that belief ended, your patience ended with it. not in anger, in clarity. This is where the regret deepens, not because they want you back, but because they see themselves clearly for the first time. Their patterns, their delays, their emotional half steps. They see how much time they had and how casually they treated it. Avoidants don't feel regret as pain, they feel it as disorientation, a sense that something valuable slipped away without noise. They question their identity, the independent one, the self sufficient one, the one who doesn't need much. Because now they feel the lack. They don't miss you. They miss who they were allowed to be around you. Calmer, more present, less guarded. And that version has nowhere to land now. This is where the internal conflict peaks. Reach out and risk rejection. Stay silent and carry the unresolved weight. Neither option feels safe, so they freeze. Avoidance freeze. When both movement and stillness feel threatening, they may start revising the past, softening memories, reframing moments, downplaying the depth, not to lie, but to protect themselves from the impact. But the body doesn't revise easily. The body remembers how it felt with you, and no narrative can overwrite that. They realize this wasn't about timing, it was about readiness. And readiness didn't arrive until it was too late. They understand now that your absence is not a pause, it's a boundary, a natural one, a healthy one, and that makes it harder to resent because there's nothing to fight, nothing to push against, nothing to blame, only self reflection. This is the stage where avoidance turns inward, not in growth, but in confrontation. They see how often they rely on people being available without committing to them, how often they leave emotional doors open to regulate themselves, and how rarely they ask what that costs the other person. You became the evidence they can't ignore anymore. They realize you didn't disappear to punish them. You disappeared because you stopped betraying yourself. That realization does something profound. It shifts the narrative from they left to I didn't show up. And that truth is heavier than any breakup. They feel respect, not admiration. Respect for your self containment, your clarity, your growth. And that respect creates distance they can't bridge without changing. Avoidants don't chase what exposes them, they retreat. But retreat doesn't erase the lesson, it plants it. You become the marker, the moment they realize some people don't wait forever, and that access is not guaranteed. They carry that realization into every future connection, sometimes unconsciously, sometimes with regret, sometimes with fear, but always with the knowledge that something ended because they weren't ready to be present. And that knowledge doesn't fade. Eventually, they stop trying to make sense of it by looking at you and start looking at themselves. This is the quiet reckoning avoidants don't talk about, not the dramatic regret, not the sudden confession, not the grand return, but the slow understanding that something meaningful ended because they couldn't stay present. They realize you didn't move on suddenly. You moved on gradually, patiently, internally, while they were assuming. Time was flexible. While they were assuming, distance had no cost. While they were assuming, you would always be there. That assumption is what breaks. They see now that waiting was never your identity. It was a choice, and choices can change. Avoid and struggle, most with irreversible outcomes. Because irreversibility means the pattern failed. The pattern that says, I can pull away and return when I'm ready. That pattern only works when someone stays emotionally available. You didn't. And that's when the meaning finally lands. They understand. You didn't walk away because you stopped caring. You walked away because you started caring about yourself. That distinction matters because it removes resentment. It removes drama. It removes the ability to villainize you. They're left with truth. Truth doesn't shout. It sits. It lingers. It waits to be acknowledged. They think about the moments you paused for them, the times you softened, the conversations you held open, the patience you extended, not as guilt, as realization. They see now that you weren't asking for too much. You were asking for reciprocity. And reciprocity is not something avoidance knows how to offer without work. This is where some avoidants grow, not by coming back, but by changing how they show up next time. Others don't. They double down. They retreat further. They avoid deeper. But either way, your role in their story is fixed. You are the moment their pattern stopped working. The moment they realized access is not guaranteed. The moment distance stopped being power and became loss. That realization doesn't fade with time. It integrates. They carry it into future relationships, sometimes as fear, sometimes as hesitation, sometimes as regret, but always as awareness. They learn something essential. People don't wait forever, and love doesn't pause on command. You become the reference point they didn't know they were creating, not because of drama, not because of intensity, but because of dignity. Dignity is rare, and rare things leave marks. Here's the part you may not realize yet. The moment you stopped waiting was not just their reckoning, it was your turning point. You didn't lose power, you reclaimed it. You didn't abandon the connection, you honored yourself. You didn't close your heart, you redirected it. And that matters more than whether they ever reach out. Because healing is not about being chosen late, it's about choosing yourself on time. The moment you stopped waiting is the moment your nervous system began to recalibrate to safety, to stability, to self trust. You didn't need closure, you became it. And if they ever look back, what they'll see is not someone who disappeared. They'll see someone who outgrew the pause, someone who refused to live in emotional suspension, someone who understood that love should feel mutual, present, alive. That understanding will serve you far longer than their regret ever could. So if you're listening to this and something inside you is settling, if you feel calmer, clearer, more grounded, that's not distance, that's alignment. You didn't lose someone when you stopped waiting. You found yourself. And if this video put words to something you've been feeling but couldn't name, if it helped you understand why walking away quietly was actually strength, stay here. Subscribe for more truths that don't chase validation, don't romanticize waiting, and don't ask you to abandon yourself for connection. Like this video, if you're choosing presence over potential, share it with the version of you who needed permission to stop waiting. Because the moment you did, everything began to change.